Welcome. We are just thrilled to have you here with us today.
Absolutely.
If you are joining us right now, it is likely because you share a certain curiosity about the invisible forces that shape our world, our cultures, our very
The
minds.
underlying architecture of society, really.
Right, exactly. You are someone who wants to understand the why behind the way human beings construct their lives. And
Yes.
today, we have a profound deep dive planned for you.
It is a big one today.
It really is.
Huh?
As we get started, if you are watching the video feed, you will notice the backdrop behind us has shifted. The bustling, chaotic imagery of our last deep dive is kind of melted away.
Replaced by something a bit more serene.
Very serene. A highly orderly Scandinavian cityscape. You can see the clean lines of Copenhagen there, the calm waterfronts of Stockholm.
And if you look closely, a distinct lack of towering steeples dominating that skyline.
Yeah, that is the key detail. My colleague across the table is already making meticulous notes, and for good reason, because today we are tackling a deeply philosophical and sociological question.
A question that has sparked, what, thousands of years of debate?
Easily. It is the big one. What happens to a society when it simply stops believing in God?
Is religion a fundamental prerequisite for a moral, safe, and contented life?
For centuries, the global consensus has been a resounding yes. But today, we are going to examine that assumption by exploring the work of Phil Zuckerman.
He is a sociologist and professor at Pitzer College.
Right, someone who has dedicated a significant portion of his academic career to studying secularism. We are drawing heavily from his book, Society Without God.
And the central paradox we are going to tease out today is this: how is it that some of the most distinctly non-religious, highly secular nations on Earth are simultaneously ranking at the top of global indices for happiness, social trust, and moral order?
Okay, let's unpack this.
It is a fascinating paradox to explore, and it really challenges some of the most entrenched assumptions humanity holds. I mean, if we look at the conventional narrative,
The one passed down through millennia.
right, across diverse cultures and continents, it insists that religion is the indispensable glue of societal stability. You often hear echoes of Dostoevsky's famous philosophical provocation.
If God does not exist, everything is permitted.
Exactly. The prevailing belief has long been that without a divine rulebook, without a fear of cosmic retribution or, a promise of eternal reward, human beings would inevitably descend into moral chaos.
The assumption is that selfishness would just reign supreme. Crime would skyrocket.
The social fabric would simply tear itself apart. People are taught, almost implicitly in many parts of the world, that morality and divinity are inextricably linked. You cannot have one without the other.
But Zuckerman's research examines a reality that disrupts that whole narrative. He looked at Denmark and Sweden,
Two countries where atheism and non-belief are entirely prevalent.
where regular church attendance is in the single digits for the average citizen. And he documented communities that appear to be, well, thriving.
According to the data he compiled, they exhibit incredibly low crime rates, high levels of civic engagement, and really strong social cohesion.
And what makes this deep dive so compelling is how Zuckerman gathered this information. He didn't just sit in a university office in California looking at census data and, making broad generalizations.
No, he actually packed up his life. He immersed himself in the ground-level reality of Danes and Swedes.
He spent 14 months living in Aarhus, Denmark. He was conducting what sociologists call ethnographic research.
And for those who might not be familiar with the term, ethnographic research means he didn't just send out a multiple-choice survey via email.
Right. He moved into their neighborhoods,
He drank coffee in their cafes.
attended their community meetings, he ate in their homes, and embedded himself in their daily routines.
He conducted intensive, hours-long interviews with over 150 people from all walks of life.
From teenagers to the elderly, factory workers to local politicians.
He then triangulated those personal conversations with the hard demographic data.
To put it in perspective for you, imagine you have this high-performing engine. Every mechanic in the world has told you that there is one specific, highly complex part, let's call it the religion valve, that is absolutely essential.
They tell you that without this part, the engine will explode.
Or at the very least, just grind to a halt. But then, Zuckerman opens up the hood of this smoothly purring Scandinavian engine and finds that the part is entirely missing.
It is just not there.
And yet the engine is running flawlessly.
What's fascinating here is how this precise realization forces us to fundamentally decouple two concepts that have essentially been treated as synonyms for centuries.
Societal well-being and religious adherence.
Exactly. Zuckerman's on-the-ground observations suggest that morality can operate purely as a human construct. It is capable of standing on its own without needing a theological pillar to hold it up.
Because when he spoke with these individuals, he wasn't finding a society full of existential dread or nihilism.
Which is exactly what the traditional narrative would predict.
Right.
If you have no God, you have no meaning, so you must be depressed.
Right. But instead, he found this quiet contentment. It is an empirical observation that entirely subverts the theoretical expectation.
And to understand how they arrived at this point, we really have to look backwards before we can look forwards. Denmark and Sweden were not always bastions of secular humanism.
That is a crucial point. It really makes you think about the trajectory of history. We aren't talking about societies that were uniquely immune to religion from the dawn of time.
Not at all. Historically, Scandinavia was deeply, deeply religious.
For centuries, they were tied to Christianity, specifically to Lutheranism. The state church was the absolute center of gravity for community life.
Church attendance wasn't just common. It was deeply woven into the fabric of the state, the culture, and the daily rhythm of the people.
So if they had this deeply ingrained Lutheran history, what was the catalyst that actually emptied the pews?
That is the big question.
How do you go from a society where the church dictates the rhythm of the week to one where religion is barely an afterthought?
The why is perhaps the most critical part of this sociological puzzle. To understand the shift, we have to examine the well-documented sociological link between existential anxiety and religious fervor.
Okay, let's break that down.
This is a concept known in sociology as secularization theory, specifically the existential security hypothesis. Throughout history, life has been incredibly precarious for the average human being.
Rampant disease.
High infant mortality, crushing poverty.
Unpredictable weather patterns ruining crops. Just a general lack of control over your own basic survival.
When your daily life is defined by that level of vulnerability, when a single failed harvest or a sudden fever can destroy your entire family, religion provides a vital psychological and social safety net.
It makes sense. It offers comfort, a promise of a better afterlife when this life is so brutally hard.
And a community that will theoretically help you in times of desperate need. You pray for rain because you have absolutely no irrigation.
You pray for healing because you have no antibiotics.
Precise.
So it is a coping mechanism for a world that feels entirely out of your control.
Exactly, according to this sociological framework. But what happened in Denmark and Sweden, particularly accelerating in the mid-20th century, was a radical transformation of the human standard of living.
They experienced immense economic prosperity.
Unparalleled access to education, massive advancements in public health. The existential dread that had haunted humanity for millennia was systematically mitigated.
And the specific mechanism they used to mitigate that dread was the comprehensive welfare state.
Yes.
Let's really dig into how that works, because it didn't just happen by magic. The government, driven largely by social democratic political movements, stepped in and engineered a society where the fear of absolute destitution was heavily cushioned.
It was removed from the daily equation.
Right. If you lost your job in Denmark, the state ensured you had robust unemployment benefits so you wouldn't starve or lose your home.
If you got sick, the state ensured you wouldn't go bankrupt, paying for a doctor.
If you had a child, the state provided extensive paid leave and subsidized childcare. So think about what that does to the human psyche over a few generations.
The desperate needs that historically drove people to the church, the need for charity, the need for a community safety net.
The need for hope in the face of insurmountable worldly suffering.
All of those were suddenly being met by secular institutions.
It is as if the welfare state successfully competed with the church for the role of ultimate caretaker. And because its benefits were tangible, immediate, universally applied in this life, rather than promised in the next.
The reliance on the church naturally began to fade.
That is exactly the dynamic Zuckerman highlights. When basic human needs are guaranteed by the state, the urgency of religious devotion tends to wane.
But we also have to look at the political climate that allowed this to happen safely. There was a deliberate political movement to separate the influence of the church from the mechanics of the state.
Now, it is important to note a technicality here. Countries like Denmark still technically have a state church, the Church of Denmark. You even pay a small church tax unless you actively opt out.
However, its actual political power has been systematically neutralized.
The goal was to ensure that religious institutions could not dictate government policies, or educational curricula, or social laws.
By doing this, they created a public sphere driven entirely by rational, secular, evidence-based discussion. Religion wasn't outlawed or violently suppressed.
That is a really crucial distinction from state atheism seen in some authoritarian regimes.
It was simply privatized. It became a personal choice rather than a societal mandate.
It makes you think about our own society, doesn't it? When we see cultural tension on the news or highly charged religious debates entering the political sphere, you have to wonder how much of that is actually just masked economic or existential anxiety.
Are people clinging to dogmatic beliefs because they feel a deep sense of physical or financial insecurity?
Zuckerman's research suggests that when you make people feel safe, when you remove the terror of poverty or medical bankruptcy, their grip on supernatural explanations naturally begins to loosen.
It is a compelling lens through which to view not just Scandinavia, but the entire world.
It really is. And this brings us to what that secular reality actually looks like on the ground today. Because if religion has receded, it hasn't left a vacuum of nothingness.
Not at all. Zuckerman vividly describes how religion in these countries has essentially become a cultural relic. He uses the term belonging without believing.
Belonging without believing. I love that phrasing.
It is treated with a sort of polite, casual indifference. A Dane might still use a church for a traditional milestone, a picturesque wedding, or a baptism.
Right. And let's be honest, sometimes people just want the historic 14th century cathedral for the aesthetic photos.
Absolutely. It is a beautiful venue. You want the stained glass, the choir, the tradition, but you do not necessarily buy into the theology behind the altar.
It is treated more like a cultural heritage site than a place of literal spiritual salvation.
Precisely. The baptism is viewed more as a cultural welcoming ceremony for the child, a reason for the family to gather, rather than a literal spiritual cleansing of original sin.
The actual dogma is largely ignored.
Regular Sunday church attendance hovers in the low single digits, but this absence of religion has not led to a void in values.
Which brings us to the core of the societal structure. If God isn't binding the community together, what is?
According to Zuckerman, he found a completely different value system functioning in its place. The answer he found was a culturally ingrained prioritization of equality, fairness, and social welfare.
We are talking about humanistic principles.
Yes, there is a strong sense of mutual respect, an emphasis on social justice, and a tangible feeling of collective responsibility for the common good.
It is the idea that we are all in this society together here and now, and therefore we have an absolute obligation to ensure everyone has a baseline of dignity.
This collective ethos permeates their daily lives, particularly in how they view work, life, and basic human rights.
In many highly competitive societies, there's often a hyper-individualistic focus. Success is framed as personal wealth or personal advancement.
But in these secular Nordic countries, the cultural attitude towards work-life balance is fundamentally different. They do not view human beings merely as economic engines meant to produce capital.
Therefore, benefits like a year of paid parental leave, heavily subsidized health care, free higher education, these are not viewed as political perks.
They're viewed as basic rights. It stems from a secular belief that every human life has inherent dignity and deserves to be lived with a baseline of comfort and opportunity.
The system is designed to support the human being, rather than the human being existing to support the system.
And you see this clearly in how they foster community and how they raise their children.
Without the weekly gathering at a church or a mosque or a synagogue, how do they stay united?
They do it through community-centric festivals, national holidays, and cultural events completely devoid of religious undertones.
They celebrate the changing of the seasons. They have deep traditions around the summer solstice. They celebrate art. They celebrate historical milestones.
And when it comes to their children, the upbringing is highly intentional. They aren't teaching children ancient scriptures as literal history.
They are actively fostering critical thinking, empathy, and scientific literacy.
The goal of a parent in this secular society, as Zuckerman observed, is to raise a child who can navigate the complexities of the world using reason.
Someone who cares about their neighbor, not because a deity commands it, but because it is the rational, empathetic thing to do.
Which leads us directly into the philosophical core of Zuckerman's findings, the question of morality.
Without a divine rulebook, without the Ten Commandments explicitly outlining right from wrong, what is actually preventing moral decay?
Why aren't these people constantly stealing from each other? Why is violent crime comparatively low?
Zuckerman argues, based on his exhaustive interviews, that secular morality is rooted in the dual pillars of empathy and reason.
He suggests that secular morality requires active engagement rather than passive obedience to a text.
Now, hold on. Let's play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
If we are relying entirely on human empathy, Isn't that incredibly fragile?
It can be.
Empathy is notoriously biased. Sociologists and psychologists tell us all the time that human beings are naturally wired to feel empathy for people who look and act like us, our in-group.
And we can be pretty ruthless to outgroups.
Exactly. Did Zuckerman find that the secular morality falls apart when it comes to outsiders? If there is no overarching divine judge saying, love thy neighbor, regardless of who they are, doesn't a morality based just on human feelings risk becoming tribal?
That is a very astute question, and it is a common critique of secular ethics. Zuckerman addresses this by pointing out that their morality isn't based solely on raw emotional empathy.
It's coupled with rational, institutionalized humanism.
Yes, raw biological empathy can be tribal, but when you apply reason to empathy, you get a formalized ethical framework.
The Danes and Swedes he interviewed didn't just say, oh, I'm nice to my friends.
They articulated a reasoned philosophy of reciprocal altruism. They understand intellectually that a society functions best when fairness is applied universally.
Considering the well-being of others naturally leads to societal norms of kindness, transparency, and accountability.
You do not steal from your neighbor because you understand that being stolen from causes pain. And you, as an empathetic creature, do not wish to cause pain.
Furthermore, you rationally understand that if stealing becomes normalized, the society you rely on collapses.
It is a morality built from the ground up, based on shared human experience and rational self-interest combined with compassion, rather than from the top down, based on divine decree.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially when we look at how they handle massive bioethical debates.
Think about complex modern issues like euthanasia, genetic modification, reproductive rights.
In heavily religious societies, these debates often become completely paralyzed by dogmatic absolutes. Texts written 3,000 years ago simply didn't anticipate CRISPR gene editing or life support machines.
But Zuckerman details how, in secular societies, these dilemmas are navigated through scientific understanding, evidence-based debate, and public consensus.
Let's look at how an ethics committee might function there. They do not consult clergy to find out what God thinks about stem cell research.
They bring in doctors, ethicists, sociologists, and citizens.
They ask what reduces human suffering, what promotes human dignity, what does the peer-reviewed science actually say are the risks and benefits.
They deliberate rationally.
It doesn't mean they always agree immediately. Secular societies have fierce debates.
But the framework for the debate is grounded in observable reality, not theology. It allows for flexibility, nuance, and progress as new information becomes available.
Furthermore, in the absence of an all-seeing divine judge, the community itself becomes the moral enforcer.
And I don't mean that in an authoritarian surveillance state way. I mean it through the power of shared activities, civic engagement, and social trust.
When you are deeply embedded in a community that values equality and fairness, ethical behavior is constantly reinforced by the expectation of reciprocity.
If you cheat the system, say, by committing tax fraud, you aren't angering a god. You are directly harming your neighbors, the people you share a community with who rely on those taxes for their health care.
This creates a powerful social contract. It relies heavily on social shame and mutual respect rather than the threat of hell.
And according to the data Zuckerman cites, it actually works.
We see remarkably low levels of political and daily corruption in these countries, alongside some of the highest levels of societal trust recorded anywhere on the globe.
People trust each other.
Yeah.
And they trust their institutions to do the right thing because the culture actively cultivates that mutual respect.
This entire moral and cultural framework isn't just an abstract idea discussed in cafes. It is structurally embedded into the very institutions that govern their daily lives.
Let's look at education. We touched on it briefly, but let's dive into how secularism fundamentally shapes schools.
When a society decides that religion is a private matter, the public school system obviously changes. How do they handle religion in the classroom if they aren't completely ignoring it?
They certainly do not ignore it because religion is a massive part of human history and global current events.
But the approach is entirely different.
In these secular systems, religion is taught objectively, usually in a comparative religion or philosophy class.
Students learn about Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and secular philosophies side by side.
The focus is on understanding what different people around the world believe and why, rather than instructing the students on what they should believe.
There is no religious instruction disguised as science. You won't find creationism taught alongside evolution in a biology class.
The educational priority is intellectual development, critical thinking, and practical life skills.
This prepares students to engage with the world based on facts, giving them the tools to question authority and think independently.
And the same logic applies directly to their healthcare systems. There is a commitment to universal accessibility and evidence-based medicine.
Public health policies are dictated by scientific research and epidemiological data.
There are no religious restrictions placed on procedures, medications, or family planning at the state level.
Decisions regarding hospital policies are made purely on the basis of what will physically and mentally heal the patient and promote overall public health.
It is a system built on the premise that human health is a fundamental right, unencumbered by theological debates over the sanctity of certain medical interventions.
And when you scale that up to politics and law, the effect is significant.
The strict separation of religion and state in the realm of governance means that the laws of the land are crafted to be universally fair.
They have to pass the test of secular rationality. A politician cannot stand up in the Danish parliament and say, we must pass this law because it is written in the Bible.
That argument would hold zero political weight and would likely be viewed with deep confusion.
A law must be justified by how it serves the public good, how it protects human rights, and how it promotes equality.
This creates a legal system that accommodates people of all faiths and people of no faith equally.
No one group gets to impose its specific moral code on the rest of the population through the power of the state.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see why these institutions collectively contribute to the remarkably high global rankings in happiness and quality of life that these countries consistently report.
When your education system focuses on critical thought, when your healthcare system protects you without moral judgment,
And when your legal system treats you fairly without religious bias, it fosters an environment of incredible security.
this translates directly into civic duty. Civic participation, like their consistently high voter turnouts, which often dwarf voter turnout in the U.S., isn't driven by a religious leader telling a congregation it is their divine duty to vote for a specific candidate.
It is driven by a deep internalized sense of communal responsibility.
They vote, they pay their relatively high taxes, and they participate in local government because they fundamentally believe in maintaining the social cohesion that benefits everyone.
Voting is almost treated as a secular sacrament.
It is a profound structural alignment between the values of the individual and the function of the state. But sociology can sometimes feel a bit dry if we only look at the macro-level systems.
What makes Zuckerman's book so effective is how he humanizes the data.
He introduces us to the faces of secularism. As you mentioned earlier, he didn't just crunch numbers. He sat in living rooms and had coffee with real people.
Let's look at some of the specific individuals he interviewed to understand how this plays out in a normal human life.
Yes, let's talk about Lars. Lars is one of the individuals Zuckerman profiles. He's a middle-aged Danish man.
When asked about his beliefs, Lars is completely non-religious. He doesn't pray, he doesn't believe in an afterlife, and he doesn't look to a deity for guidance.
Yet, by any standard metric of human behavior, Lars is a profoundly moral person. So, where does Lars find his moral compass?
According to his interview, he finds it in the concept of human dignity and everyday interactions.
For Lars, treating others fairly, doing his job well, and acting with compassion isn't a stepping stone to heaven. It is simply the right way to live among other people.
His moral compass is grounded entirely in his direct relationship with his fellow human beings.
He focuses on the here and now. He values honesty because honesty makes his relationships better.
He pays his taxes because he sees the direct benefit to his community's schools and roads.
And then you have Maria's story. She identifies explicitly as a secular humanist.
Her perspective, as documented by Zuckerman, is deeply optimistic about the human condition.
She holds a firm belief in the innate potential of human beings to espouse good, to create beauty, and to build just societies entirely without divine oversight.
For Maria, removing God from the equation doesn't diminish humanity. It places the ultimate responsibility for the state of the world squarely on our own shoulders.
It is a philosophy of profound agency. If there is to be justice in the world, we cannot wait for a deity to deliver it. We must create it ourselves through our laws and actions.
If there is to be comfort for the grieving, we must provide it through our presence and support.
That brings up a fascinating point about grief and the human experience. We are so often told that without religion, life is meaningless, or that dealing with tragedy is impossible without the promise of a reunion in the afterlife.
How do people like Lars or Maria deal with death? How do they find meaning in a finite existence?
Zuckerman explores this, and he found that these individuals derive incredibly deep, resonant personal fulfillment from their immediate surroundings.
They find meaning in their families, their deeply held friendships, their meaningful work, and their civic responsibilities.
They do not need the cosmos to give them a grand eternal purpose. They create purpose through connection.
Exactly. When you recognize that this life is the only one you have, it can actually heighten the value of everyday experiences.
And structurally, they form strong, deeply supportive networks that mirror the social safety nets traditionally provided by religious congregations.
A local community center, a parent-teacher association, a neighborhood cooperative, or even just a tight-knit group of friends participating in a hobby.
These become the secular congregations where people find belonging.
When someone experiences a tragedy in these secular societies, the community still rallies around them. They bring food, they offer emotional support, they help with daily tasks.
The mechanism of human compassion operates identically. It just lacks the theological vocabulary.
It is humans showing up for humans.
So what does this all mean? As we synthesize this massive journey we have just taken through Zuckerman's research, the big picture becomes quite clear.
Society without God provides a detailed empirical case study showing that cohesive, ethical, and prosperous communities can absolutely function without divine mandates.
The paradox we started with is resolved by looking at the data and the lived experiences of millions of Danes and Swedes.
Zuckerman's findings demonstrate that a decline in religious influence does not equate to a decline in moral behavior.
Empathy, rationality, and community commitment can form a moral framework that is just as robust as traditional religious structures.
It forces a reevaluation of how societies can be organized. It shows that human beings are capable of building high-functioning, deeply moral communities based entirely on secular humanism and a strong social contract.
Why should you care about what is happening in Denmark and Sweden? You should care because we're living in an increasingly pluralistic, deeply interconnected world.
We are constantly brushing up against cultures and belief systems that differ from our own.
And in a world like that, reliance on a single religious dogma as the sole source of morality can often cause friction and conflict.
What Scandinavia offers us is a proof of concept.
It offers an alternative model for cultivating a harmonious society. It shows that it is possible to build a society based on shared, secular humanistic values that protect and uplift its citizens, regardless of their metaphysical beliefs.
It is a mirror held up to the rest of the world, challenging us to examine our own systems. It asks us to consider whether morality can be approached as a shared human project rather than a received dictate.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own. It is an idea that builds on the sociology we have discussed today, but takes it one step further into the unknown.
A hypothetical stress test for this secular model?
Exactly. If, as the sociologist suggests, the secularization of these Nordic countries was largely driven by their economic prosperity and a comprehensive social safety net that removed daily existential dread.
What happens if that security is shattered?
Imagine a massive, unprecedented global crisis. Perhaps severe catastrophic climate change that disrupts food supplies globally, or a total, devastating economic collapse that wipes out state resources.
If the state can no longer provide that ultimate security, if existential terror suddenly returns to the daily lives of the citizens and the hospitals and unemployment offices close their doors,
What happens then? Does a society without God, out of sheer desperation and fear, fall back into religious fervor, seeking supernatural comfort when the secular state fails?
or is the muscle of secular humanism, the deep cultural habit of communal empathy and rational cooperation, now strong enough to hold the line in the dark?
It is a profound question about the ultimate resilience of secular morality under an absolute maximum pressure. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep asking the big questions. We will see you next time.